Rhonda, you ready to get going?
Absolutely. So, welcome everyone. As way of introduction, my name is Rhonda Vincent. I'm the Director of Educational Training at Momentous Institute. So happy to be here with you. And then my colleague, introduce yourself, Kelly.
Yes, thank you. My name is Kelly Richmond, and I am an education trainer here at Momentous Institute. I'm excited to see some friends across the DFW Metroplex and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Right. And we're happy to tackle this, the topic with you. We do have some experience in this area in that Kelly and I specifically, but others as well, have worked for the past about 6 or 7 years, really helping districts to implement their SEL initiatives. And so we do that. We've done that in the past by writing our own curriculum, some in-classroom coaching, some admin coaching and consultation. And so we're happy to share what we've learned through the bumps in the road as we've traveled that road with lots of different campuses. So just to let you know, so just kind of start off. So who we are, for those of you who don't know us, if you want to, advance that. For those of you who aren't yet friends of ours, we are Momentous Institute, which is a nonprofit agency located in Dallas, Texas. We have three parts to our organization. We have a nationally recognized lab school, which serves children from 3 years to 5th grade. Most of them are economically disadvantaged, and we're figuring out what works best with kids who might not do well in other types of schools. And so we're researching that. And then we have our therapeutic services. We serve between 5,000 and 6,000 youth and families every year through all different types of therapies. And then the department that Kelly and I work for is research and training. So we like to look at the research and see what's out there and borrow what we think might work. And we also contribute to the field of research by researching everything we do, including training such as this, but also what we're doing in our lab school and with our partner campuses. And of course, this is an example of some of the training that we give. So that's just a little bit about who we are. The mission of our organization is to support children in reaching their full potential by supporting their social emotional health. We know that's as important as being physically healthy, being cognitively healthy. We know being socially and emotionally healthy is important, not just to academic success, but also to success in life.
At Momentous Institute, we define social emotional health as the ability to understand and manage one's emotions, reactions, and relationships. We view social emotional learning as the process in which you use to gain those skills to make you essentially healthy at the end of the day. Our hope is that at the end of the day, students learn skills such as self-regulation, communication skills, and problem solving so that they can ultimately be change makers in your classroom, in your school community, and beyond. We use a stair-step model to go towards building social emotional health here at Momentous Institute. And if you've been with us before, you may recognize this. So we look at building this skill by first really leaning into safe relationships, providing classrooms where students feel safe, seen, and heard, and provide opportunities for students to take risks, to understand how they fit into the school context and within relationships. We also teach kids explicitly about how to self-regulate, and we do that through teaching about the brain, breath, body, and impulse control. And then from that, we want to build kids that are self-aware. And so some skills that we teach to develop that skill or that competency, if you will, is gratitude, optimism, grit, and resilience. We first want them to understand themselves so then they can put themselves in other people's shoes, right? And understand others. And we do that through teaching perspective taking and empathy. And then again, lastly, our ultimate goal is to build skill in students so that they can become change makers. And so we provide opportunities for them to learn how to be kind, compassionate, and ultimately hopeful for today, their future, and in anything that they want to do with their learning or their interactions or anything like that. All right, so you came here today to learn and think about implementing social emotional health. So just in the chat, what percentage of schools report SEL is fully implemented on their campus? So is it 25%, 50%, or 80%? So 25, 50, or 80. So just in the chat, what is your gut on schools that are reporting that SEL is fully implemented? All right, oh, we have some A++ participants this afternoon.
A lot of agreement here already.
Yes, absolutely. Diane, yeah, 10%. So what we know is that it's less than 50% of schools report that they're able to fully implement social emotional learning. We know that there may be bumps in the road, so that's why we're here today. But what we've also learned over the past 5-6 years is how we can kind of increase that number, as we know there are many other stressors facing educators in schools these days, right? The closing academic achievement gaps, teaching in a pandemic. And so we really want to leave you with this afternoon some tips for success, and then we're going to tackle some things that may be some obstacles and kind of offer some guidance on how to kind of approach those things. So your first tip for success this afternoon is to involve stakeholders. Well, if I can get it up, right? There we go. Involve stakeholders. And how you do that is by building awareness, creating shared vision. How do you want your school to feel when people walk into the building? How do you want your classrooms to feel? Establish vocabulary and use it in different contexts. So if you're teaching your students to be kind, use the language of kindness. How did it make you feel? And then share that with parents, with your front desk, with your cafeteria workers. Get everyone on board with that same SEL language so that the experience that our students are having in the classroom is supported and facilitated in different contexts, right? Because that's how learning really happens. And then lastly, a way to involve stakeholders is to identify why SEL is important. And I think that if this year has taught us anything, it's definitely taught us all that connections, relationships, and the well-being of our adults and students is of the utmost importance. We cannot get through this work time space by ourselves. We have to look at what skills we need to collectively be successful and ensure that all needs are met. The second thing that you can do or we can do to have a successful implementation is to use a systems approach. So in the chat, go ahead and add in something that comes to mind when we say systems approach. What would be a system at your school or in your district that goes towards building social emotional health and learning? So add that in the chat, and then we'll kind of unpack a few other ways that you can do this at your campus or within your district. Absolutely. So Marie Claire, scheduling, discipline practices, and an actual curriculum. Absolutely. What else comes to mind when we mention systems approach? Kimberly, absolutely. Morning meeting. Yeah, getting that a school-wide non-negotiable or a school-wide practice is definitely going towards a systems approach. Consistency. All right, Diane, holler it in the back of the room too. Consistency. That is crucial to building a systems approach, right? It's not a one and done, right? You're not going to just have a morning meeting on the first Wednesday of the month, right? You want to build that as a consistent practice. Absolutely. Class circles, class meetings, implementing procedures with fidelity? Yes, absolutely. Everything that you've added in the chat are definitely ways to kind of use that systems approach to your advantage as you are implementing a curriculum. And lastly, follow through and extension activities. Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Other things that we've kind of learned the past couple years that really kind of put it all together. First being really thinking about how the physical environment can support SEL in the classroom. So think about, do you currently have a safe space or a calm down corner? I know one of the schools that we worked with in the past called it the peaceful corner or the bounce back center, right? Is there visuals in classrooms and throughout the building that remind students to use breathing or use kind words or whatever skill you're wanting them to build and grow in? Think about pictures as well. What pictures do you see in and out of classrooms that support SEL practices? That's definitely one thing that we've noticed can help support that implementation. And I see in the chat that Guadalupe just added parent meetings, excuse me. That's a huge way to get everybody kind of on board and share the good word of what's going on in classrooms.
And I love what Samantha just included in there, some really great suggestions for using your physical environment. So a feelings bench. So if you don't know what a feelings bench or a friendship bench is, Google that and you'll be very pleased if you teach elementary school. So a feelings bench with books, stuffed animals that are labeled with different feelings, along with pictures on the wall. I did want to say one of the things that we've done at Momentous School is that we put pictures of kids, our own students, functioning in ways that we want to see. So we might put pictures of kids collaborating in a small group or helping a friend. Maybe one person, there's a picture of somebody giving a presentation and everybody else is listening. So capturing those moments when children are doing exactly what you're hoping they'll do that really represent social and emotional health, and then making those really evident. So I wanted to put that in with visuals because that's another really easy tip.
Yeah, especially for our youngest learners, right? That are still learning the way of school, of how to interact, and definitely a great tip there. And then even thinking about classroom expectations. Are you building the skill of compassion or kindness or grit and impulse control in the way that you're writing classroom expectations or procedures? And then even from there, thinking about across the campus, thinking about school policies. I know somebody added earlier, like discipline, right? Are we talking about discipline in a strengths-based approach, right? What skill do our students really need to learn? Are we thinking about equitable practices in our school? Are we giving kids the chance to reset, to redo, and to build problem-solving skills? Think about it that way as well. A few other things that you can think of for a systems approach is to kind of do some self-checks, right? Self-checks in your classroom, self-checks across the school. Are we all consistently implementing or attending to the needs of our students? And then lastly, thinking about communication and how we present information to kids. Are we the adult leading with empathetic language so that in turn our students are building that skill? Definitely all go towards building that systems-wide approach. Rhonda, anything else to add there?
I think you got all the points, yeah.
All right. So next, we're going to kind of tackle some anticipated challenges. And so we've read your questions that came in before the training. And so we're going to spend the next probably like 10, 15 minutes really kind of unpacking some typical challenges that come up as you're implementing.
Yeah, and before we turn that slide, I just wanted to tell everybody that absolutely we got some of your questions beforehand, and so we do have those and we'll address those. We're going to go through about 4 different challenges that are really typical, and then we'll have a Q&A session. But I want to encourage you, as you are listening and thinking about this on your own campus, feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the chat, because we really have reserved room here to kind of just listen to what you have to say and what you might be struggling with, and give you our best understanding of what has worked for us and for others in the past. So before we unpack challenges, what I wanted to tell you is there are very common challenges to the implementation of social emotional learning initiatives. And we've worked with public, private, and charter schools, and some of those challenges are identical regardless of the school structure. And they can really inhibit success in implementation. And my experience as somebody who's trained teachers for a long time in this field is social emotional health and social emotional learning is embraced by almost all teachers. They get it. They get that, kids need to have this part of themselves well developed. They understand how it would make school easier, and their job's frankly much easier if you have kids who are functioning really highly in those types of skills. Where everybody gets a little bit stuck is implementation. So what does this look like in my classroom? And that's really what we've done in the past in order to kind of support other schools. So here are 4 challenges that we want to start with, that we want to unpack for you. And here's the first one, and it should come as no surprise to anybody because it almost doesn't matter what you're implementing. And you ask teachers, well, what's really holding you back? And I guarantee time is the number one thing. And time is always the enemy. We can't always have, we can't ever have more time in the day, obviously. And there's just so much to get done. And so when we think about how does that impact our ability to implement, it's a real valid problem. So, and I love this. Adrian, you just said that spending more time up front saves more time later. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely right. I mean, that really is something that we need to, I don't know, produce a bumper sticker or something, because we say it so often that if you front load social emotional learning skills, then you end up with kids that you're not spending so much time redirecting and solving problems and reorienting to tasks. And all of those things are always going to happen, but not nearly in the sort of the frequency if they don't have these skills. And so, Adrian, you are speaking our language. So here's how we try to problem solve for how do we ensure that social emotional learning fits into the day. So I'm going to give you a couple of strategies, and these all are very simple, but added together, I think they really do make a difference. The first thing is make it in the daily schedule. Put blocks of time or 1 block of time in the daily schedule for social emotional learning practice. So some of you may have already purchased a curriculum, and that's a great thing. Curriculum is important because it gives teachers who aren't well versed in this a way to teach it. But it's almost the least important thing you can do in terms of getting it implemented, right? Implementation is how are you generalizing it? How are you living it out? And I'm telling you, if it's not on the schedule, it's not going to happen. So you have to have it on the schedule, even if it's just in morning meeting and maybe 15 minutes at the end of the day for closing circle. So you've got to rank it almost as high as literacy. And it's one of those things that we don't bump it off because we're having an assembly or there's testing. You keep it on that schedule no matter what else is happening, because these skills are so important. So number 1, make it part of the daily schedule. The second thing is work with your SEL team, if you have one, and hopefully you will, in order to create sort of a roadmap for how it's going to be implemented throughout the school year. So your SEL team should be able to help teachers navigate what like if I have a curriculum, what should the pacing look like? How much time should I be spending on this? What happens if I'm running a morning meeting and the kids are not paying attention, or they're just being silly and it's taking too long? So you have to have somebody in order to help them navigate those types of issues so that it's not creating this big, huge time suck in a classroom. So creating that roadmap with, if you don't have an SEL team, at least the admin team, maybe working with counselors. So daily schedule, creating a roadmap with the SEL team, and then start the school year with this. So it's much easier to have this is part of the way we do business at Smith Elementary, rather than, okay, we're going to try something new. Now, having said that, let me say, if you haven't done any SEL, like a morning meeting, it's never too late to start. I think it's always good to say, hey, I just learned something new, and this is going to really help us to get along in a way that's going to make us all proud of each other and of ourselves. And it's going to really help us to be a team and a family in our classroom. And so we're going to start morning meetings. So if you haven't started, don't say I have to wait until August. Go ahead and start. But next August, start right away as part of the way you do business. And then the next thing, and I think this is super important, and it's...
I'm going to add one thing, Ron, before we move on. Even if you're going slow and steady, know that just pausing to breathe or setting up a quick morning meeting or check-in, that is building social emotional health of your students. So no matter how big or how small, know that that time is well spent. So thinking about like, oh, I'm not quite ready to do it all, but what part of the day, whether it be stopping to return to calm and building the practice of breathing or mindfulness, or is it the morning meeting, whatever it may be, know that small moment really will have a big outcome at the end. So slow and steady if you're just getting started, and it's never too late to get going.
Yeah, thank you. The last tip I have under time, let me just grab that right. Yeah. And this goes along with what Kelly was just saying, is the practices she was mentioning, breathing, check-in, closing circle, those sort of very quick, 1 to 2 minute type practices. Start with light lift practices first. So these light lift practices generally have very high impact dividends. So when we talk about morning meeting, it's a light lift because it's pretty easy to do. If you look at responsiveclassrooms.com, they have a whole morning meeting book, and a lot of it's online, so it will walk you through the steps very easy. If you go to Momentous's YouTube, you'll find several videos showing you how to do a morning meeting. So that's like a 15-minute thing in the morning that it's routine, very easy, light lift, but it has huge impacts later on. You bet I'll repeat that. It is responsiveclassrooms.com. I'm not sure if it's classrooms or classroom. Kelly will probably search for it and stick it in the chat. And again, we have a YouTube video, a YouTube channel that will show you some of that information. So that's what we wanted to say about time. Start at the beginning of school, make it a daily schedule, have a roadmap, and implement light lift strategies early on. So the next challenge that we have is buy-in, teacher buy-in. And a lot of you probably know this really well. I'm curious as to, are there any administrators on? So if you're an administrator, could you put a yep, I'm here in the chat? I would love to know if we have any admin in here.
I just linked in. So yeah, we have a few here.
Good,
a coach.
Excellent. So you know that teacher buy-in is huge. And you can tell that you're not getting teacher buy-in. There's so many different ways to kind of gauge this, but sometimes you get literal resistance, like directly, I'm not doing that. I teach reading, I teach math. It's hard to get through these curriculum standards I have for the year, let alone doing something else. And so you might have really direct, nope, not doing it. More often that you probably get sort of passive avoidance, where like, yeah, that's a good idea, but, and you get a lot of that kind of why this won't work. And then sometimes you get some people who will look like they're on board and they're going, oh yeah, we're doing it. But when you go and check, they're really doing something else or not doing it at all. So it can be really frustrating, and I truly understand that. But without teachers, you can't implement. So I'm wondering if you want to drop in the chat your guess here. What percentage of administrators or principals report that they expect all their teachers to teach SEL? So our things are 50%, 70%, or 95%. So what is the teacher or the principal's expectations? 50, 70, or 95? How many do they expect all teachers?
About half.
Yeah.
70, 95. I got this one wrong as we were planning this training.
Actually, the answer to this is 70%. So I take that as administrators who are pretty realistic. So they know they're probably not going to get 100%, but they want a tipping point, which would be more than 50%. So, but then we know from Kelly's poll question, only 25% actually do. So we've got this sort of variance there that we really need to address. It was a teacher who and I'm trying to remember if I have her name here somewhere, but a teacher in Illinois asked the question, is SEL something new to add to the plate, or is it the whole plate? And that is a pedagogical, or not pedagogical, it's a paradigm shift. It's a way of thinking about SEL. Is it something extra? It's not one more thing I can do, or is it, this is the essence of really nurturing children in the context of teaching them? So it has to be that paradigm shift. And as administrators, that's part of your job to figure that out. So if we think about how we do this, the first thing is be very careful about insisting and doing non-negotiables. So while we want everybody to implement, one of the things that Jim Knight, who is a, well known in especially the coaching field, so whoever wrote that they were a coach, you probably know Jim Knight well. He has a great saying, and the saying is, if we insist, they will resist. And so be very careful about saying a very much top-down approach, and we are doing this, and we're all going to do this, and we're doing it at the same time. Be careful about going in from that standpoint to start with. Where you should go in is really the why. Know why you're doing it and communicate that with teachers. So there's so much research out there that says why SEL is important and how it helps children advance academically, not just socially and emotionally, but also academically. So if you're familiar with the CASEL website, which stands for the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, you'll find tons of research. And Kelly, click, she's going to drop that in. And if you go to that site and you just click research, you'll find even some PowerPoint slides that are already put together for you. So you can use that to talk to your teachers about why this is important. I'm going to go back to something I said before, which was about your SEL team. So try to get your SEL team, hobble one together if you don't have one, and have them be models, not people who are sort of, checkers, like, are you doing this or are you doing that? They're not really meant to evaluate. They're really meant to be models of how you do SEL, encouragers when they see something that's going well. These team members can be thought partners when you've got teachers who are really struggling. They might provide PED for the teachers. And that's really important because oftentimes teachers don't know this stuff very well. So, they can provide that PD. What we want to steer you away from is the trap of using your SEL team as sort of disciplined fire hoses. And we've worked, personally, Kelly and I have worked with a really great group of individuals who were hired as SEL teacher leaders in a wonderful district. And without much direction, what ended up happening for a lot of those is teachers would call on them when they had a big discipline problem in the classroom and they were supposed to fix it. And it really didn't advance the implementation of social emotional learning and building the skills, the muscles that teachers need in order to do this well. So use your SEL team wisely. And then teach teachers how to teach SEL. So if you have a curriculum, that's going to be really helpful. I know in the curriculum that we wrote at Momentous, we actually put some scripting in there and encouraged teachers to use their own language. But what we found early on is that they didn't really have the language of social emotional learning and weren't really sure how to communicate the concepts that they were trying to teach. So a curriculum will be really, really helpful. Here's some of the ways that you can do that. teach them how to breathe. So for instance, use faculty meetings as places to practice these very simple things, like how you model breathing, having a mindful minute, doing a stretching exercise or a brain break. Those types of things that you can do in order to model so that they will turn that around. As somebody who used to teach for the better part of 20 years in higher ed, I know from my own experience and from research that teachers will turn around the way they have been taught, which is why, you know, even though we all know better, sometimes we default in times of stress to some of the worst teaching practices we know because it's what we've lived. And so you have to get these practices, you have to get them doing the practices. So the easiest way to do that is to do it as a faculty group. Consider having your grade levels, or it's probably grade levels if you have a grade specific curriculum. If it's banded, you can put grade levels together, but have them work together like in a PLC to figure out what the next unit is going to look like, and have them here. So be thinking about those things. And then the next thing is really more internal. So the first thing that you might do, especially if you're an administrator, is to think about what could you maybe be doing as an administrator that might be bringing about some resistance. And clearly you wouldn't be doing this on purpose, but there might be some things that you're doing that maybe feel evaluative or are a little bit confidence reducing to teachers. So be thinking about what could I be doing in order that might be really bringing out resistance. It might be you haven't laid out a very careful plan, and teachers love a plan. They don't necessarily, generally speaking, teachers don't like to fly by the seats of their pants. They like to know, we're going to do this here, and at the end of this week, 6 weeks, I should be here, all of those types of things. So it might be something as simple as you haven't really conveyed a plan quite clearly enough. The next thing to do is to chase the why. This is something that we always coach our teachers when they're dealing with a kid that might be challenging for them, is to chase the why. Why is the child responding in this way? So be thinking yourself about, why are teachers, some of your teachers not implementing, and get curious in a really respectful way. So you might actually, this is not a might, you probably should do this. Talk to teachers, talk to them in small groups or even one-on-one, and listen to understand what are the barriers for them. What's keeping them from being successful or even feeling successful to implementing social emotional learning. So, and then when they tell you, try very hard not to sort of, disregard those opinions, even if you feel like, okay, well, those aren't even valid. It's really important to validate the way somebody is feeling, even if you don't agree with it. So listen to understand what's going on and validate those feelings, and just be curious in a really respectful way, because that puts you in the position of being a thought partner. Kelly, did you want to add anything? I've been just...
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, our teachers just want to be heard. So providing a listening ear, validating their thoughts and feelings, I think is the best way to kind of tackle that initial first step, because we know they have a lot on their plate. And so it's figuring out, like, how can we move the peas around and the mashed potatoes so that it can all fit, because they're all equally as important. And again, start now, think small, and just know that any of those moves or practices are really going to be long-term beneficial for our adults and our students.
Yeah. So we want to talk about the third one, and it is integration, rather. We all know it, and 2020 was just the weirdest year, and sadly 2021 is turning out to be almost as weird. And so we're all behind the 8 ball, maybe several 8 balls in terms of time. And I'm not really sure how we're all going to solve for this, but in a typical year, when you have typically kids are in class and you have a typical school year, we're always pressed for time to get through all of our curriculum, particularly in a high stress high stakes testing environment. So we all know that is a reality. And so there comes a problem when you're asking teachers to, we want you to put social emotional health as part of the way you do business in your classroom. And yes, you have to do everything you were doing before. And that can feel really overwhelming. And so the answer to that is really integration. And I feel in my experience that sometimes educators can misunderstand what we mean by integration. It's not saying you take a math lesson and you try to figure out how do I teach social emotional health along with the math lesson. It's really taking pedagogy. So when I think about pedagogy, I'm thinking about instructional materials and instructional practices, what choices I make and how I deliver this that really puts the social emotional health into any content that you have. So focus on pedagogy, particularly where you have opportunities to have students' voices heard. That's a big part of social emotional health, is being able to communicate respectfully with one another, be heard by your peers, voice your opinions, making decisions, all of those types of things. You've got to have student voices in there. Student choice is another biggie. So that's a pedagogical choice that you can make. So how are you offering kids choice within the learning? Emphasize the social nature of learning. So, I think that probably I'm a very linear person in terms of my thinking, and I'm very often, I want to get from A to B as quickly as I can. And so sometimes I have to unpack from that to say, well, wait a minute, it might be faster to just do direct instruction all the time, because that's the most time efficient way, but is that the most efficient way to really get kids to learn and practice social emotional skills? And it might not be. So think about the value of having kids share ideas. So really easy things like think, pair, share would be one. Jigsawing would be another. These are things that have been around for decades. So they're not new practices, but how are you putting them in to your pedagogy in a math class or a science lesson or in social studies in a way that really helps kids practice the skills that you're teaching them, probably directly through a curriculum. And then the last one is teach kids how to use the social skills they need to be successful. So for instance, let's say you have, let's say you're teaching social studies. That's one of the subjects I always liked as a teacher. And so let's say you're teaching Texas history and you're telling kids, okay, so we've taught you about Texas history, you know what happened, you know about the battles and the treaties and how it ended up. And so you're gonna work in a group and you're gonna come up with some way to explain to an audience your big takeaways. What big things did you learn? And so here are the criteria. You have to have two geographical references in your presentation somehow. You have to mention two of the main leaders from either side, from the Texan side and from the Mexican side. You have to have some dates. So you come up with all of these different criteria. And then you tell the kids, okay, so you're going to be working together. Let's say you're going to be making a poster. What kind of decisions will you have to make? And you kind of walk them through that thinking. What do you do if you have an idea and the rest of the group doesn't like it? I mean, that negotiation, that's a social skill. What do you do if you get stuck and one person doesn't want to work anymore? So, how are you going to make group decisions? So you kind of front load those skills so that when you set the kids free and they're actually doing their tasks, you can go around and you can literally facilitate the work rather than doing what I did as a new teacher and going around and solving problems and, splitting kids up and reorienting them to the task, that type of thing. And of course, there's always going to be some of that, but try to think of ways that you can teach those skills that kids need in order to be successful. I know that integration is really hard work and it can exhaust teachers because it does require them to add another layer to their thinking. But we have to think about how do we build stamina in teachers so that SEL is maintained for the whole year, not just in September when things are nice and rosy. We need social emotional learning all the way through, which brings us to our last barrier, and that is sustaining enthusiasm. So we all know exactly what happens. We all are, fresh-faced and all, our best selves when we walk into our classrooms in August or September, whenever your school starts. And, by the time October or November comes around, it's a whole different ballgame. You start getting tired. Some of the patterns are getting redundant, particularly with, certain kids and certain behaviors and the expectations that you have on you, and everything isn't so bright and shiny. This is the same thing with social emotional learning. And we sometimes expect social emotional learning to be the panacea and that it's going to solve all the problems and that the kids will never misbehave. And that teaching will just be some sort of heavenly fairyland, and it's not true. So you're always going to have challenging behaviors. You're always going to have deadlines. All of those things don't go away, but it does make teaching easier, and it is supportive of children in being successful in the classroom and successful in life. We also know that social emotional learning is a long game. So research shows us that it takes about 3 years of implementation to really take hold. And so I think telling teachers to, part of getting them to sustain enthusiasm is to let them know up front, listen, this is not something we're adopting just for the first 6 weeks of school, and it's not going to go away next year. We are really married to this for the long haul. This is what we think is best for kids, and this is what we're going to do. So here's some of the ways to sort of help sustain that enthusiasm. The first thing, and this is so easy to do, but we often don't think about it, and that is elevate what's going well. I think as teachers, we tend to zone in on what's going off task so that we can reorient it or redirect behavior. And so we tend to look for what's going wrong. And so again, this is another paradigm shift. Look for what's going well. So if you have an SEL team or your admin team, as they're walking through hallways, have them use those cell phones to take pictures of morning meetings, or have them record small videos of kids doing a positive affirmation chant, or lots of different ways that you can do that. Take pictures of different teachers' calm down areas in their classroom, and then what you need to do is develop those pictures, print them off, and then put them up somewhere where teachers can see them publicly. So, the teacher's lounge is a great place to have these, so that you're really affirming this is what's going well, and we learn from each other. So post those pictures, use social media to broadcast it to families. I think it was Guadalupe who mentioned involve parents. Firmly believe in that. Social media is a great way to do that. In fact, we when we first wrote our curriculum, we didn't have any family engagement in there, and just in the last year we've written family pieces so that families understand this is what your kid is learning at home, at school, and here's how you can practice it at home. So social media is really great for that. Take your teachers, divide them up and take them on learning walks so that they can visit other teachers' classrooms and learn from each other. It's a lot less stressful to be okay with being a novice, and teachers are not very good at a comfort level of being a novice because they're expected to go from being, a student teacher to, okay, you're a full-fledged teacher, you're on your own, you should know it. And that's a real hard transition. So whatever you can do to feel okay, if you're a teacher yourself, feel okay with, what, this is a big mountain and I'm just on the bottom slope, and that's okay. If you're an administrator, affirm what's going well and make people feel okay with being a novice. The second part I mentioned already, another tip is making SEL part of your staff meetings, but also make it part of your parent meetings. So if you have PTA meetings or open houses, those types of things, great places to incorporate SEL practices. And one of the really powerful things you could do is have the students lead the parents in those practices. So have some student representatives lead the parents in, a breathing exercise before you get into the meat and potatoes of your PTA meeting or whatever you're calling them. And then also incorporate, if I know that there was at least one coach on this call, incorporate the social emotional learning lens into your coaching. That's a really important thing to do, because oftentimes the issues that are in a classroom are not exclusive of academic issues. Oftentimes you have a child who has not developed maybe a certain group of social emotional skills. And so their behavior might get into the way of their learning, or their learning might be really frustrating and they're responding with behavior. And so it's both of those things. And I mention behavior because oftentimes when children don't have social emotional skills like impulse control, empathy, perspective taking, optimism, those types of things that are on the stair step that Kelly mentioned, if they don't have skills like that, then the lack of those skills or the underdevelopment of them will show up as behavior issues. And so that's why I mentioned that. We have written a coaching book, and Kelly was so instrumental in this, serving as a coach. We've actually written a book called Coaching for Momentum, and we're piloting it right now with a group of coaches, and just to kind of see how that works. But we've kind of outlined a framework as to how a instructional coach could adapt the SEL lens. And so that, if you're interested in that, stay tuned, because we'll be starting another cohort in the fall. And then we'd also like to recommend the book, The Teaching Brain by Vanessa Rodriguez, a really great resource that talks about sort of the complex working of being a teacher and how the SEL lens layers on that. So those are the four really common challenges. Love to kind of field some of your questions now. So Kelly, are we up to the part now?
So we'll just take the next 3-5 minutes before we close out our time together. So if there's any question that we didn't get to, or that's kind of resonating with you in our time together, or maybe the reason why you came and we didn't address it, please feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll get to it. Let's see. Yes, and so I'll add in the book, The Teaching Brain, to the chat. Yes, I'll do that right now.
And I think the coaching playbook is actually the Coaching for Momentum. I think that's available in our shop as well. I'm pretty sure it is. So you can buy that without participating in the cohort, but we'd love to be better friends. I saw some of the questions that were asked before you came on. One of them was about assessment, and I thought it was a great question. It said, it's hard to assess how it's helped the students and if the students are following what they learned and using it outside of the classroom. Great observation. So I think assessment is super important because you have to have a baseline. There are lots of different assessments you could use. One of them is freely available, and it's called PATHS, P-A-T-H-S. So if you Google PATHS, you'll find its teacher fills that out and evaluates the child. And you can do that beginning, middle, and end of year to kind of see how that's going. And then also there's a Pearson product called SSIS, a Social Skills Inventory System, that is really a nice piece. But there are lots and lots of assessments. And I wanted to mention this just before we get on to another question. Using it outside of classroom, that's super important. So that's why you have to involve families in letting them know what you're teaching, so that when you do have a conference with a parent, make it part of your parent-teacher conferences and say, so, we've really been working on compassion. Have you noticed Jimmy showing compassion I know he's got some younger siblings. How have you seen that show up for Jimmy? So that you can gauge that. I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I just saw a question come in. Great, especially for our early childhood classrooms, when you have two teachers in the classroom, one is buying into the process and one isn't quite there yet. And naturally, it causes some tension. I would encourage you to listen to both sides of the kind of issue, or kind of to understand the clear reality of what's going on in the classroom, and then work together on an agreement as a natural first step. So this is really where your coach or your counseling or someone on your admin team is facilitating a conversation to come to an agreement on what they can both work on together. Because here's what's going to happen. They'll quickly realize when they're both putting energy into the same thing or into one small step together, they're going to see some evidence of success with that. And again, it may be slow and steady, but first it would be to listen. Second, it would be to come to an agreement on a practice or maybe an interaction on how they can both work together. And hopefully in time that will kind of connect, and they'll both be able to work towards, supporting all students' social emotional health. It's definitely very accurate, and it happens sometimes.
Well,
Um,
I was going to just add to that. It's really tricky. I also think it might be worth your while to have a conversation with the person who's resistant alone, so
right.
that they don't feel like they're put on the spot, and really listen and dig down into, what's keeping you from doing this. And then maybe when you get together, maybe the person who's bought in can talk about how could you support me so that you're not working against what I'm trying to implement, so that they're, even if they're not both marching in the same direction, at least they're not sabotaging one another.
Yes, absolutely. And the why, kind of setting that, like, why it's important, right? Setting that importance factor. I see a question come in about a fifth grader. How could I implement SEL virtually when I only see him for 30 minutes? So think about what you can control. So is it that brief check-in at the beginning of your time together? Is it a quick breakout room to do a one-on-one kind of check-in? Is it building the skill of breath? So thinking about what small thing can you do within that 30 minutes to build that skill? And also think about your feedback. If you're noticing the student maybe struggled last semester to show up, let them know that this semester, hey, I've noticed you've been here every day this week. It's so great to see you consistently, right? So also use your language to build that skill in your student. Rhonda, anything else for that short amount of time?
I think what I would add there is think about the skills that you would like to most see in this child. So maybe grit is one of those, where we
Yeah.
think about grit as effort, and you can ask the child, obviously tell them what that means and what did you really pour effort into yesterday,
Mhm.
and how did that show up for you, and what will you pour effort into today, so that you're elevating what you want to see, and you're giving him an opportunity to recognize those. So I would definitely do that. I also definitely agree with the check-ins. There was one other thing and I can't remember it. So if I remember, I'll put it in the chat for you, Sam.
Awesome. And then I also see, we have some great people here from other organizations. Thank you, David. David works for an organization, Bridge Lacrosse. Check out helloinsight.org. Has a great youth development assessment and some resources there. Thank you, David, for joining us and sharing.
Yeah. And I think
Time.
Samantha Sam. I apologize, Samantha. Your name was truncated on that on that chat.
Oh, yes, I see it now. Time for one more before we kind of end our time together. If not, feel free to reach out to us through our social media or shoot us an email. Okay.
So okay, it seems like we kind of got the questions. We did mention a lot of the products that we have, so we wanted to make sure that we left you with some specific information. So Kelly's going to talk about some of these avenues for you if you're
Yes.
interested.
So definitely check out our blog. Our blog is divided by category. So if you're interested in parenting resources, just search parenting at the top left corner. If you're looking for how to build impulse control or self-regulation, all of our content is tagged, and so you'll be able to find everything we have. And then also we have a podcast, and then our social media, Momentous Institute on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram are great resources as well. So you found, oh, go ahead.
I'm going to stop you really quickly to answer Susan's question because it's
yes.
important. So Suzanne asked, how do you get parents to buy in when they seem less comfortable? It's kind of the same answer about teachers, but often in terms of, really understanding why and listening to what's making them uncomfortable. But I think a lot of times what social emotional learning is might be different than what they think it is. And so particularly with the breathing, and they sometimes, especially in the Bible Belt, equating that with sort of a meditative state and Eastern religions, and that can be upsetting to some people. And so making sure they know what it is that you're doing and why it is. And that Castle site that I mentioned, and they have PowerPoints there under research, it actually has a PowerPoint presentation designed specifically for parents. So that would help you. That'd be a great thing to do during a PTA meeting to say, this is why we're doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the schools that we support had the same issue. And so in turn, what they did is they utilized their social media platform to kind of unpack like, oh, like this is a mindful moment. Here's how it supports the brain to body connection. Here's something that you can practice that I'll show you how to practice it. And then maybe it's something you could try at home. Typically what it is just a misunderstanding or using our own experience, which is absolutely valid, right? We all come with our own experiences, our own understanding. So it's just a great way to pause, level set, and kind of share really what it is. So you found us once, so thank you all 30 plus of you coming this afternoon. Check back on our events page for more upcoming training. Next week, we have 2 other free kind of Q&A sessions about big behaviors and resilience. And then we update it probably monthly. So definitely check back in the coming weeks for some more opportunities.
Yeah. Yes, it is recorded and it will be available for a month. So you'll get that, I think, via email. What Kelly's just put on the screen is we do have some on-demand training. So these are, there's 10 of them. They're 1-hour videos that come with viewing guides. So it'd be a great thing for an administrator to use with the faculty if you want to start introducing this. And 10 really good ways to kind of get people understanding important elements related to social emotional learning. And then the last one we wanted to share is our store. So we have an e-store. People were asking us for a long time, how can I get a glitter ball, or how can I do, get these types of things? But and so we've made an online store. It had lots of different ideas and resources for you. So we encourage you to look on that. If you have, sometimes you have funds to spend from the school, and these would be great things to invest in. So that's what we have to show you. We are on lots of social media, so please do join our blog, look us up online. We have Twitter and YouTube, and I think also Instagram. So it's not on here, but we do have Instagram. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Bye, David. Thank you. Bye, Ramona. Thank you.
Bye,